My Lords, I'd like to thank the noble Lords Walney, Goldsmith, Panic and Lord Hogan Howe actually for listening at committee, because there were reservations raised, and I think therefore it's really refreshing and unusual to have an amendment brought back that's tried to take into account some of the issues that were raised in all good faith. And I do think the fact that the amendment's been now posed as not unduly undermining freedom of speech or association, with that very much in mind, and doesn't criminalise expressions of support, I think is very useful. And the fact that it's so much narrower in scope does make it much more, I think, possibly something I support. Not that everyone's been waiting for that point, but nonetheless, nonetheless, and I do think what it's trying to do, which is a more serious point, is the pre-prescription point. I think this is really important because my dread is that what's happened with Palestine afterwards getting into the court case is discredited what prescription is about and watered down what people think terrorism is. And I think these kind of much more granular attempts at making distinctions are so important. So anyway, so that's on that. I do, however, think that we need to still acknowledge, in relation to this whole group of amendments, the dangers here of what we mean by extremism, especially today when we've had the government's anti-extremism pronouncements, or they're coming out, that we should acknowledge that those who hold the pen on any legal definition of extremism acquire extraordinary powers to curtail free speech, to criminalise people, and so on, and it makes it a difficult issue. In a democratic pluralist society, there's invariably a wide range of beliefs and opinions that can be dubbed extremist, and that means that we have some potholes to negotiate around, and it can lead to partisan, subjective and political labelling of dissenting views that can be dubbed extremist. So I want to raise that because I don't think it's straightforward. We might all think that we know what we mean when we say extremist, and all the examples that I've heard today are things which I agree. I think, oh yes, extremists. I don't like them either. I'll dub them extremists. The problem is that when it's used a bit more promiscuously, and if the definition is of extremism, that's something that completely undermines democratic norms and values. Can I just say that up until recently, I would have thought that anyone attacking the democratic norm that's gone on for, hundreds of years, a key legal protection traditionally afforded to due process, anyone attacking that I would have thought was an extremist. But now we have a government pushing through abolishing jury trials, and I'm meant to accept that as like being straightforward. And I'm sorry.
I'm very grateful to the lady for giving way. I just wanted to thank her, obviously, for recognising what has been done in this amendment, but also just to suggest to her that the amendment doesn't actually talk about extremism. It talks about extreme criminal protest groups, and it may reassure her, I think, that the definition doesn't depend upon the particular views being put forward being extremist. It's really the actions that are extreme, the particular conduct, the riot and so forth. I just offered that as perhaps reassuring her on the point that she's making, which otherwise I'm listening to very carefully.
Thank you very much for that clarity, and I think in relation to that amendment it's true. I was actually really kind of going on to talk about why I'm both sympathetic to Amendment 419, calling on the government to publish a counter-extremism strategy, but recognising that when we do that we have to acknowledge that this is a difficult area. And I think that actually the amendment that's been referred to, the first amendment, has carefully avoided it being on views and opinions, but not all the amendments in this group do. I'm just making the point that we have to be very careful when we talk about extremism. Yes, on Amendment 419, it is actually true that one should congratulate the noble Lord Government of Wickham for his persistence, as has been said. But if I can just say why I like this particular amendment, it actually calls for the amendment for a review to be published annually. So the fact that there's been an acceptance today that there is a strategy doesn't make this amendment irrelevant, because actually I think we need to carry on updating and looking again and again and very carefully at what it is we mean, and laying it before Parliament seems important. The preemption of the new social cohesion document, protecting what matters, certainly is being posed as an anti-extremism strategy, but actually is likely to get itself into all sorts of difficulties precisely because of this uncertainty about what we mean by extremism. You know, beyond the controversy of the special representative on matters of anti-Muslim hostility, which the noble lady Baroness Deitch has already talked about the difficulties there, and I'm very anxious. And if I can just say that I've been contacted since the announcements come out by people who've been working on the grooming gangs, who are worried that they will fear that they wouldn't be able to raise it with this definition, even though they're not quite sure what it is yet, so fair enough. But people who are academics working on cousin marriage and so on and so forth. By the way, there's been some enthusiasm on certain quarters to say we should now name and shame all the media organisations who are dominated by anti-Muslim hatred. So you can already see that, as it were, the supporters of this new definition, such as it is, are gearing up to start pointing fingers and have started naming names. So I think it's fair enough. But, you know, this leaked document that said that national symbols like the Union flag can be a tool of hate used to intimidate and exclude, or an extremist symbol and so on, you can see why people would be anxious. When we're asking universities to manage external speakers to ensure that we keep out extremists, which apparently is in the document, and I'm not quite sure that I want university managers who tend to be on the progressive side deciding who the extremists are. And especially on a day when we've just heard that 27 UK Islamic university societies have actually had memorials to Iran's supreme leader. UCL, Imperial Bristol, Leeds, Warwick, all sorts of places, Cambridge. And that sort of it seems to me it's not the external speakers, it's what's happening in the universities themselves. Or when we think about Professor Michael Ben-Gad, who has been called an extremist by his own students, an economics lecturer, because he was in the IDF and has been threatened to be beheaded. Or the rabbi in the University of Leeds, the Jewish chaplain, who only a couple of years ago, his wife and 2 children were forced into hiding. And the university authorities have let all that happen. So I'm simply raising the point that although there's a strategy out, and we've got a group of amendments, we all think we know what we mean by extremism, I don't think it's that easy, and I don't think this strategy will solve all problems. And therefore, I would actually like to say that the annual call for a discussion on what extremism is, where we're at with it, and a full and open discussion, not just in Parliament, but with the public, rather than treating the public as though they're the problem, the extremists who need to be managed and policed, that we should be having a much more open and full discussion about what it is that problems it is we're trying to solve.